Do you know, that is so lovely, I've almost, but not quite, forgotten the series scoreline. Cheers.
Welcome back to Cricket and Cocktails. This is the third Ashes Test review. The series has ended as a contest after Australia beat England in Adelaide by 82 runs to go 3-0 up with 2 games to play. To be fair to England, the team put up a good fight today. They did well to take the game into day 5 after slipping to 194 for 6 late on day 4. They were in pursuit of a mammoth target of 435. That target was inflated by local heroes Travis Head, 170, and Alex Carey, 72, both South Australian, and they both shone on their home ground. England's Jamie Smith attacked the short ball from the outset on his way to 60 off 83 balls today. He put on 91 runs for the 7th wicket with Will Jacks before he miscued Pat Cummins to Mitchell Starc on the leg side. Will Jacks and Bryden Carse resisted for more than an hour after that dismissal before Jacks was brilliantly caught at slip by Labuschagne off Starc, and Archer slapped a wide ball from Starc to deep third 4 overs later. Scott Boland sealed the win by having Josh Tongue caught behind. I'll be discussing the series defeat with Alan Bone and our guest contributor in this episode, Sky Sports editor Adam Williams. But before that, questions about the makeup of the team, the players, the coaching setup and the management do tend to get louder after a massive series defeat. So with that in mind, let's have a recap of the previous episode where I asked Ben Koski, John Batham and Alan Bone about the future of Brendan McCullum as coach, the future of Ben Stokes as captain, and I also asked about the future of Ollie Pope, who has been a little bit skittish and short of runs, batting at number 3 in the order. Bear in mind, England had won 1 game in 17 before McCullum came in. England seemed to have fallen out of love with their cricket. He made them fall back in love with their cricket again, freeing them up. But as Jonathan Agnew said, the way in which they were freed up was unsustainable beyond a certain point. Do you think that's the issue? And would you keep the Stokes-McCullum axis and let it run until 2027, or would you make the change early?
We've prepared for 4 years. It's been all about this, blah, blah, blah. Bashir is our spinner to take on Australia. Well, we haven't seen him. We haven't seen him because he's not very good. That's a big call by McCullum. Coaches are supposed to make big calls, but then they're judged on whether they get those right, and he got them wrong. But the other thing to mention in all this, of course, is we've talked about McCullum and Stokes. Well, I'm sorry, the first person that needs to go is Rob Key. He's the head honcho at the top, and the buck stops with him. So as far as I'm concerned, he should have resigned already.
He goes without any question whatsoever. The line has been that all these changes we've made, this approach, this attitude, it's all geared towards winning the Ashes. If he can't do that, he has to go, and he leaves, it, in my eyes, a long trail of damage behind him in terms of what he's done, not only to the Test team, but to the English game as a whole, by which I mean completely destroying the link between domestic performances and Test selection. Stokes, I think, does survive as captain if he wants to. It might be that he may say, I've done my time, I feel it's come to the end of its natural cycle. I hope he doesn't, because I think he is, as we've seen so often, he's a top quality cricketer who gives everything. I think he's got more to offer, and I don't see a great deal of alternatives as captain within the current setup either.
It's difficult. I think the one thing that we all seem to agree on is that Pope has got to, whether he stays in the team or not, has got to be taken out of the number 3 position. That wasn't the batting of someone who's inspiring any confidence at 3. So I think he's got to go out of there.
Thank you very much for joining me on Cricket and Cocktails. Alan Bone and Adam Williams and myself, Ben Feasey, AAB. There's no C's on this podcast. That's a matter of general principle. So first of all, Adam, as you're our newest guest, I'd like to get your immediate reaction to the results of this third Test match, and perhaps a little reminder of some of the material Sky Sports have put out about the reason behind England's failings, chief among them a lack of preparation.
Well, Ben, thanks very much for having me on your latest edition. I wish I could be here in happier circumstances, and we could be talking about the possibility of a brave fight back and Christmas miracles and what have you as we heading to Melbourne in the MCG and the new year. But unfortunately, it only took 11 days. And I wonder what other great anticipations have been dashed in the space of 11 days like this one. There's numerous reasons, and lots of people have had their say and have done their respective post-mortems on England's fortunes in this series. But you mentioned poor planning and preparation there. I think that barely scratches the surface. There's been themes that you've spoken about in your 2 episodes so far with the previous 2 tests that have carried on. We saw some fight there, didn't we? We saw a bit of character towards the end, but it was fleeting. And I think that's probably what's been a common theme throughout these first 3 test matches.
I mean, and the fight back isn't Bazball as we know. It's a very patient innings from Stokes, little bit more combative from Jamie Smith, but there was a lot of playing for time. Zach Crawley as well, playing the percentages. We've talked about poor planning and a lack of preparation. Now we all know that we don't live in an era where you play 3 or 4 state games as you did in the olden days before the first test match. Those days aren't coming back. So given those limitations, how do you believe England could have prepared better?
I definitely think they should have not played the one-day series in New Zealand before, because if they were available playing some sort of cricket, it should have been in Australia. I think that's one easy change they could have made. And for goodness sake, it's the Ashes. It should be the most important thing on the agenda. If you can't rejig your schedule to have some sort of practice games against reasonably tough opposition, when you're a cricketing nation as strong and powerful as England within sort of worldwide cricketing power, there is something seriously wrong. You cannot rock up, play a couple of giggly warm-up games or even one giggly warm-up game and a few net sessions. You would do more for preparing for a village game, frankly. Our record in Australia has obviously been terrible for many, 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 many years now, with a succession of kind of 4-0 or 5-0 defeats. Whether it would have made a lot of difference if they'd have done a full program of warm-up matches, I really don't know. But it just sets the thing off on a terrible tone before a ball's even bowled, really, doesn't it?
Adam, is it an accident that England actually played some of their, even though it was in a losing cause, England actually played some of their best cricket of the series, and we're now 3 games in? What little practice they did have was on pitches that bore absolutely no relation to what they subsequently encountered in the Test series. Archer was very economical. Zach Crawley batted very well, and in a manner quite unlike him when he scored that 85. Stokes batted with great patience. Jamie Smith played his most convincing innings of the series. So there were some positives, weren't there? Is that simply because they become more battle-hardened 3 games into a series because the preparation didn't really count for an awful lot, and it's actually the test matches to date where they've become more fine-tuned, as it were?
Yeah, I think there was that joke in a few circles before the start of this 3rd test that England had their 2 warm-up games in Perth and Brisbane, and now their actual competitiveness in the series was going to start for real in Adelaide. It's no coincidence as well that probably the flattest out of the 3 wickets that we've seen so far came in this 3rd test, and that's obviously what the Bazball era and the style has been built upon, being able to make hay while you've got the conditions in your favour. I do feel that there was clearly a mentality change and a sea change from conversations that either took place from the captain and coach, or both, or was led by the players about how they realised they had to adapt and be a bit more dynamic in the situation against this opposition. That they couldn't get away with the go hard, go fast as hard as possible with a short amount of time and get away with it on these pitches and against this opposition. It's just a real frustration that there wasn't that realization on day 2 of the first test in Perth at lunch, when they were effectively 100 for 1 and Australia were looking tired. Australia were looking short of ideas, and then within the space of 3.5 hours, the game was lost. And again at Brisbane, it was a similar theme. They had moments there were opportunities, there were glimpses of being able to take a stranglehold of the game, but Australia's ability and their patience just to withstand and to sit in those moments for longer, and also find the players to pull them out of those situations, that bore fruit at Brisbane. And again, we saw it in this test match as well, where, England did well on day 1 there. They lost the toss, but took, was it 8 wickets, didn't they? And restricted Australia to just over 300. but there were still those moments where there were opportunities there. You know, they went out in the first innings of that game with probably the best conditions of the whole match to go out there and make a big first innings score. Got off to a relatively good start in with the opening partnership, but from there, you know, they struggled for that. And despite that good partnership down the order between Stokes and Archer, they were always behind the 8 ball from that moment on. When you concede a first innings deficit in a game like that, in conditions like that, the temperature, the the pitch and the conditions, you're always going to be behind the game. You can stretch it out even further to 150 to win. 4 wickets in hand. Jamie Smith is ticking, looking absolutely fantastic, but he just goes for one shot too many in the circumstances. And from there on in, it was done and dusted, wasn't it?
Well, he wasn't alone in that regard, was he? England were 177 for 3, chasing 435. And he played that reverse sweep shot, which, let's not forget, he has profited from in the past, including in that innings. And then from the relatively promising position of 177 for 3, even though the target was massive, they limped to 190 odd for 6 before the close of play. And again, it's this failure to play the percentages, and it's this absolute determination to have cricket on fast forward. Now, I hate to single out Harry Brook, but did he really need to play that shot at that particular moment?
His series has been really disappointing. I think he's probably the most naturally gifted player in the England team, possibly the most naturally gifted actually across both teams. I think he's going to learn an awful lot from this. I predict he'll be captain the next time England go there in 4 years' time. And if I was predicting now, I'd say he'll have a very, very good series then. He's too good a player not to learn from these sort of mishaps. And I think it's one of those things where we're highlighting these particular moments. I mean, but to be honest, by the second innings, 170 odd for 3, when you're in a world record chase, the game basically has gone by that point. I mean, you know, that's not the reason England lost. The reason England lost is, well, I think the reason they've lost all 3 tests. If I could highlight one reason, it's the top order failure in the batting each time. You know, Perth 30 odd for 3 in the first innings, Brisbane 5 for 2 at the start, and then not getting enough runs in the first innings there, and the collapse in the second innings, and then here you cannot be 168 for 8 on that pitch. That's just totally unacceptable. And okay, Harry Brook has played some bad shots. I think a lot of it is he's trying to grab the initiative because there's other people in the team who probably are not good enough to be there. Ollie Pope, I've got the figures here, 8 tests against Australia, averaging 17.62 with no half century. That's simply not good enough for a number 3 at this level. They should have got rid of him last summer. And if they weren't going to do that, they should have got rid of him earlier in this series after the Gabba, where it was patently obvious that he had to go. So I think a lot of the Harry Brook stuff, yes, it looks bad to be reverse sweeping and driving to slip and doing things, but it's indicative of the rest of the team not being good enough and him trying desperately to grab the initiative. I'm not trying to kind of exonerate him, but I think
he's
that's what's
trying to
going
grab
on.
the initiative where the people.
If he had a
did not.
better top order around him,
Yeah.
I don't think that would be happening in the same way. And I predict we'll see that in 4 years' time, actually, when hopefully England will have a better top order.
And Adam, it's in stark contrast to the top 3 England had in 2010, 2011, when they had Andrew Strauss, Alistair Cook and Jonathan Trott. And I don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there was a single occasion when none of them made runs in any of the test matches. I think at least one of them made a significant score every time. That hasn't happened. Zach Crawley's picked up a couple of half centuries and has shown a bit of promise. Ollie Pope has passed 40 once and hasn't looked close to doing so since.
Kentucky hasn't reached
30 once. Adam, there's always a temptation to have sweeping changes and go back to the ghastly days when we used 29 players in the 1989 Ashes series, or the summer before that, where we changed our captain on 3 occasions in 1988 against the West Indies. But we probably have to make some changes. Would you start with the top 3?
Yeah, who's going to be 2026 is John Stevenson in Sydney, I suppose, if you're going to throw back your 1989 analogy there, going through as many different openers as you can possibly find in county cricket. I think there will be changes in that top three, and there seems to be quite a lot of noise behind the idea of putting Will Jacks in that top three now for these last two tests, which I can see the sense in because, you know, he bats in a top order in county cricket for Surrey. He also bats in the top order from time to time in short form cricket. I think there will be a natural position for him there, which I think would fit in a little bit more now that he's been battle hardened in these two games than throwing Jacob Bethel in there, who, let's be quite honest, for all of the effort that's been made and the investment that's been put into him in the last year or so, he just hasn't had the cricket to play under his belt, to get the weight of runs, to get the battle hardness, the match experience, to be ready to be thrust into a scenario where his teammates are already demoralised, for want of a better expression, and probably looking forward to how soon it is before they can jump on the plane home and be back here for the new year. I don't see there being too much drastic change for people like Harry Brook. I think he realizes that he has, you know, gone about certain shots and certain innings in the wrong way already in this series. I've never seen somebody, when they've been comprehensively bowled playing a reverse sweep, stand there and before leaving his crease for the length of time that he did in that first innings. And I can only put that down to the fact that he was just frustrated with himself. He was just infuriated that he'd had that moment where he got himself in, he'd grafted, he'd shown a bit of resistance, he'd shown a bit of adaptability, and then all of a sudden, he was done by a very good piece of bowling. Nathan Lyon is an absolute genius, but you could see on his face at the same time that in the moment and in the scenario, he had once again made the wrong decision. And you could see on his face that he knew that there would be ramifications from that.
So possibly a couple of changes in the batting. Alan, before we go on to the Australian 11, because there's certainly going to be some changes there going to the G, what changes, if any, would you make to the bowling? Now, don't forget, this is the first time in 6 years that Archer has played 3 test matches in a row. Are we really expecting him to play both test matches that remain in this series, which are only about 3 days apart from each other?
Which I would have played Atkinson in this test. I really didn't understand, you know, what he did that was so much worse than anybody else. You know, you've got to look at these two tests as, yes, we want to try and win at least one of them, of course, to get rid of that appalling record. There was 18 games without a win in Australia and 16 defeats. But you also want to be trying to bring players on with a view to 27 in England and 29-30 in Australia. And I think the two guys, well, Archer, but the people that you're looking to build an attack around are Tongue and Atkinson, because they're younger and I think they're probably better. Cass, I'd be definitely giving him a rest. I mean, I think I'd be looking beyond him after this series anyway, partly just on sort of age grounds. But I think Atkinson, they want to try and build him up so he ends up probably as the leader of the attack. You're not going to do that by not playing him. And I think we've got ourselves in a real pickle when it comes to spin. How we've ended up with a situation where they picked Bashir based on basically a YouTube video. He hasn't even got a county at the moment. They said, right, he's our spinner. He's our number one spinner to build for this series. And then you don't pick him on that Adelaide pitch. Either he's bowling incredibly badly, in which case they should have brought a replacement in, or whether it's Rehan Ahmed or somebody else, or they've made a boo-boo in not selecting him. The way that this team is being managed and run with McCullum, Rob Key, you know, you've got plenty of candidates to play the role of the donkey in the nativity play, but no sign really of any wise men at all.
I'll argue this. You could put the selection of Jacks over Bashir down to the fact that England have not been scoring enough runs and they've been seduced by the extra runs that Jacks offers down the order. And that's not really Bashir's fault. However, it still begs the question, how has Bashir been heralded, and he was a couple of years ago, as the person that was going to take on Australia in their own backyard, and you don't play him? That was it not McCullum's call? So does that make his position vulnerable, and not just for that error, because it is an error, but also for the subsequent mixed messaging when he said we over-prepared after Brisbane when they didn't take the practice match when they could have done?
I agree with you. Picking jacks as a sort of stop, as a bit of an insurance policy, because you've got 7 batsmen not doing their job. The answer to having 7 batsmen not doing their job is to change some of the batsmen not doing their job. You can't ask Will Jacks to play the role of a frontline spinner because he isn't a frontline spinner. I think the pace bowlers actually in Adelaide, if you look at the figures, and apart from sort of Casts in the first innings at the very start and probably at the start of the second day against the tail, I think the rest of the pace attack did very well. There was clearly an issue with Stokes on the third day when he didn't bowl at all. That was just mystifying. But the rest of them, I thought Archer bowled well. I thought Tongue bowled very, very well. And Cast was better than he was in Brisbane. I feel sorry for Will Jacks because obviously he's shown fight and grit and he's clearly got a lot of ability. He's a great fielder, gutsy batsman. They need to probably move him to the top of the order. Let's see if he can make it as a top order batsman, because actually if he can, that solves a number of problems. You've then got your second spinner in him. You've sorted out one of your batting places, and you can then bring in another spinner, but you can't ask him to do the role of a frontline spinner because he isn't one.
On this spin subject, I think there's clearly got to be a lot of introspection from those who are supposedly the selectors in inverted commas, because I don't know if you saw Darren Lehman's interview that he was doing on the BBC's coverage on, I think it was day 4, when he was talking about the fact that as Northants head coach, and you know this well, Ben, from your own experience, that he doesn't know who the selectors are. He's not seen a selector on the county circuit watching any Division 2 cricket. And if you're someone like Calvin Harrison, for instance, who's been returning some pretty tidy figures and numbers for the last 2 or 3 years in first-class cricket, or you're a Rehan Ahmed, who unfortunately got himself injured on the Lions tour at the start after that Lilac Hill game. How are you feeling about not being in the frame or even in the conversation or even on the radar? The thing that baffles me is more with this is, we had Tom Hartley about a year or so ago in series in India. There was clearly some faith and there was some belief in his ability there as not only a decent slow left armer, but actually quite a decent lower order batter as well. Stokes backed him on his test debut. He gave him the opportunity to get overs under his belt, even though he was conceding runs. And then he produced a fantastic spell to win that test match in Hyderabad. You've also got Liam Dawson, who got himself back in the team for that test match at Old Trafford, where unfortunately the pitch went completely to sleep. And I don't think even the biggest magicians in the world could have produced a test match victory on that last day there. But one test and he's cast off again and he disappears. And he's another one who's been consistently at the top of the averages in county cricket. And he can also bat very well as well in the middle to lower order. So those guys have got to be looking around and looking at this Shoaib Bashir situation. This is nothing against Bashir. Yeah, I think he's been very unfortunate as well. He got that fractured thumb in that Lord's Test match, despite taking that bizarre winning wicket in that game. But that was a sliding doors moment for him for the rest of the summer. And I think if he'd had that momentum behind him and he played the rest of that series and played a pivotal role, he'd have been in that first Test team in Perth without a shadow of a doubt. And there wouldn't have even been this debate. But the fact that he's clearly been quite badly managed here, not just at an England level, but also at county level as well, with the fact he's now without a county. What does that say for his future and where does he go next?
I think you've raised a very important issue, and I do want to ask this final question before we move on to the makeup of the Australian side, which will change a little bit going into Melbourne. What you've described, Adam, is symptomatic of one of the problems with the way this England team is being managed. We have had an argument in this podcast series that the regime of Brendan McCullum, and presumably under the direction of Rob Key, has, quote, completely destroyed the link between domestic performances and test selection. So my question to both of you is, would you agree with that? And are their positions as coach and manager of the men's team tenable going into the English summer?
I think Rob Key will be the first one to go. I think he's the easiest one logistically for the powers that be to get rid of. He's been completely missing in action. I don't think I've seen him. I don't think I've seen or read any quote from him or seen any interview in this sort of shambles. McCullum, I'm a bit more 50-50. I think he probably needs to go. I think a lot of it probably does depend on actually how they do on these, like in these last 2 tests. I mean, it shouldn't be, because if they end up losing and it's 3-2, It wasn't like it was a great series and then Australia pipped it at the end. It's 3-0 and then you got a couple back, So it shouldn't have a bearing, but I think it probably will. I think there's a lot of players and management in these last 2 tests who are playing for their positions. Crawley, as we were talking about, is a good example. If he has learned and adapted, if he can get 100 somewhere in one of these last 2 tests, he suddenly becomes, cemented in the team. If he gets out 4 times flashing to slip for, 27, well, then he's not learned and they need to make a brutal decision and move on. Ditto Duckett. It will depend on what happens in terms of pretty much everyone's position on and off the field, on what happens in Melbourne and Sydney.
What do you think? Are their positions tenable going into the England summer based on some of the issues we've discussed?
A little peek behind the curtain as we record this, I do believe Rob Key is due to speak to various media outlets for the first time on this tour. I do believe that he's got Messrs Atherton and Hussain lined up in his sights there for who he'll be answering questions from. I don't think McCullum necessarily is under pressure as much as some of the others. I think, to go back to my earlier point about selectors and selection policy, I do believe there's a lot to answer for the rest of that setup there, which includes Rob Key, Luke Wright, Mo Bobat, who supposedly are the selection panel that we don't see anything for. It's not like the days of Ted Dexter or David Graven standing there in a boardroom at New Road or what have you, towering over, looking down as Graham Hick yet again tries to make his 75th comeback in the Test game. And we don't see these figureheads anymore, or we don't see them in the same way, because they're not necessarily, digesting the game or having an interaction with players in the same way. I think they've really got to sit down and review how that's working and how that link that we talked about there between the county game and the England setup is, because it's never seemed further away from my experience and in my lifetime. And to go on to the point about captain, I think it'll be purely down to Ben Stokes. I mean, does Ben Stokes really want to put his body on the line and through any more, stress and pain for relatively short-term gain? He's contracted until the end of the next domestic Ashes series in 2027, but realistically, is he going to be able to do that? And is he actually going to have the stomach for the fight to want to sit it through? I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get to the end of these 2 test matches and it takes just a minor little extra niggle and he decides that that's him done for Test cricket and his time as England captain.
So we're down to the last few minutes. Now, we do need to look at the Australian team. Brilliant performances from the 2 local heroes, both South Australians, of course, Travis Head and Alex Carey. So they're certain to play at the MCG. We know, because Pat Cummins has told us, he is not going to play at the MCG. Presumably Nathan Lyon, who hobbled off on the final day, is not going to play. And presumably Steve Smith will come back, because he only withdrew from this test at the 11th hour. So final question to both of you before I introduce my absurdly early cocktail. Which changes would you make to the Australian 11 going to the G?
Well, I was reading, I think Jai Richardson is going to come in. So in terms of the bowling, you've got Stark, no Cummings, Boland, say Richardson, or one of the other bowlers who was in the squad earlier in the series. In terms of the spinner, because they will want to play a spinner, I've literally no idea. Adam, have you got any ideas?
Also on the seam bowling front, Fergus O'Neill's another one who's got a lot of traction recently. Has been doing very, very well for Victoria in the Sheffield Shield this year. So that'll be a hometown selection if they bring him in for the G, and I'm sure that'll go down very, very well on Boxing Day if he's a Victorian. Spinning wise, it might be another Victorian as well, actually. It might be Todd Murphy, who we would have seen a little bit on that 2023 series over here when Nathan Lyon's Achilles, unfortunately, failed his calf, wasn't it? Failed him at Lords. He might be another one who's next cab off the rank. I would say that they have got some other fairly exciting spin bowlers in the ranks. I think like Corey Riccioli, which is a great name to say off the trip of the tongue. Lloyd Pope as well. And Fergus O'Neill, to go back to my earlier point, I believe he's going to be lining up again for Nottinghamshire next year.
So we could end up with a plethora of popes.
We'll see a puff of white smoke coming out the G as a new pope is elected to the team.
There's one last point. We haven't faced Australia's strongest side, have we, in this series? No. That's the slightly demoralising thing in all of this. And there's not been one test match where arguably they've been able to put their best 11 out against us. But yet they've still been too good for us. That says to the strength of their system, the depth that they've identified, I think, over the last 2 or 3 years. Pat Cummins said it himself at the end of this test match that they knew they would have to get through this series with more than just 11 players. And all 14 that they've used so far have duly done a job and stepped up. And I've no doubt that whoever they play at the G will do the same.
Oh, they have done. They've got about half the number of working professionals available to them that England have done. They've got about 200 odd, roughly. We've got about 400 odd, and they have made absolutely the best use of their resources, and it's been plenty good enough for England. So, on that slightly depressing note, I'm going to introduce my cocktail. It is about 25 to midday over here.
Much later in Australia, though, isn't it? So
Let's pretend we're in Australia. So this is actually called the Cherry 75, which was a great year for Australia. That's when Lily and Tomo absolutely decimated us, and I believe that's when David Lloyd got hit in a place where a gentleman hopes not to get hit by Jeff Thompson. So it's a Cherry 75, so there's a little bit of gin in there. There's a cherry in here, as you can see, bit of lemon juice. I think the cocktails will get progressively more alcoholic if we go 4-0 down and 5-0 down. We'll see where we're at on those. But thank you for joining me, gentlemen, and cheers to you. It's cocktail time, and this cocktail is called a Cherry 75. It's another champagne cocktail. We'll actually add the fizz at the end. To start with, we've got 2 fluid ounces of gin, 1 tablespoon of cherry syrup, and 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. And we put it into our cocktail shaker. I've got some ice in here already. Give it a shake, 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 and let's hope this is a metaphor for shaking up the England cricket team. And we pour that into here, and then we're going to strain it into our pre-chilled cocktail glass. Top it up with fizz. And then right at the end, for a bit of decoration, a cherry. So we'll give that a little taste test. And if you're an England supporter, here's to a slightly better performance at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Cheers. Goodness me, Ben, that's 2 fizzy cocktails in a row on Cricket and Cocktails. I'm going to have to start calling myself Ben Fizzy if I don't mix it up a little bit before the next episode. But on a more serious note, my thanks to Alan Bone and Adam Williams for their insights into this 3rd Ashes Test review. We'll be back just before the new year to review the 4th Test in Melbourne, which of course starts on Boxing Day. Until then, goodbye for now.